I want to tell you about my wife Gina, and some of the events that happened to us during the last week of her life, told by a woman with a broken heart. Gina pounded her brain as she sat at the computer, her freshly dried nails resting against the keys, unmoving. There was nothing. Her mind was blank, completely blocked. This was the 4th night in a row she had dedicated herself to coming up with a great horror story, every night with the same result. She threw her hands up from the keyboard. "That's it," she yelled. "I'm done." She had a good run for a little while, and it was awesome, but now she was convinced it was over. My sweetheart had immersed herself in horror as long as I could remember. I always told her that her rough childhood inspired her interest in it. It probably intrigued her to hear of people in situations much worse than her own. Even the ones that were obviously pure fiction, she loved them. The podcasts, true crime stories, the YouTube horror narrators, scary stories, Gina had done them all. Normally she was overflowing with ideas, but lately she had just been completely tapped out. She had had purely obsessive OCD for most of her adult life. Her therapist told her to start writing thoughts down during spikes. Well, one thing led to another, and before she knew it, she had her first story. We found her a writer's forum, submitted it, and people actually liked it. Her second story turned out better than the first, and her third better than the second. It felt amazing to watch her creativity soar. Gina got swept up in her newfound confidence. She sat at her computer for most of 2 days, typing out her heart and soul into a story. It was a common horror setting. There were woods, a murderer, a sharp weapon, not unheard of themes at all. It was all in the way she told it and made it her own. Anything was possible for these characters once she started to write things down. When it was done, she was proud of herself and wanted to celebrate. We literally went out and bought a bottle of wine and some cigarettes, not having smoked in well over a year. The next morning, a message got sent out saying her story was rejected. I checked it before she did and was wary of how she'd react. She was slightly hungover and just a little bummed out. These things happen, and she had had a lot of positive reactions with the other projects she'd worked on. I told her to try not freaking out about it. I could tell she was trying not to freak out about it. Still though, 4 days since later, and she still hasn't been able to write a single damn thing. It was maddening to watch her go through it. She had started doing this for therapeutic reasons and for fun. Now she was just putting pressure on herself and turning it into a source of stress. She always did this with everything good in her life, including us. Things were quiet. She decided to take a break and smoke yet another cigarette. There was still quite a few left over from the other night, so I joined her. She put the chain lock on and left the door open a crack to light it up. She hated how these smelled, hated how they made her hands smell. The porch light was off, the ember of our cigarettes the only glow in the night. She was starting to get tired. We would go to bed soon. There were about 5 drags or so left of our cigarettes when we heard branches moving to the left of the house. We lived in the woods, almost literally in the middle of nowhere. Cliché since she just wrote a story about this, but sometimes you write what you know, right? She turned on the porch lights so that we could throw out our butts, and when she did, her eyes got wider than I've ever seen. She said through the lattice of the porch in the distance, she could see a pair of human eyes. I quickly gasped, coughing on smoke inhaled the wrong way. My urge to slam the door was overwhelming. Instead, Gina gently turned the knob and closed it as softly as she could. Maybe if he didn't know that we knew he was there, assuming it was a he, it would buy us more time to call the police. There was no good, decent reason why someone would be in our yard that late at night. Gina was more than a little freaked out at this point. It looked like her mind was trying to break the fence of all the progress it had made so far. She was awash with every bad thing that could result from this situation, temporarily frozen in her thoughts. I grabbed her by the hand and rubbed a thumb over her knuckles. This always calmed her down, she had told me once before. I told her to search for her phone. Of course, she couldn't fucking find it. Realization hit her like ice water pouring down her back. Her phone was in her car. She left it in there so she wouldn't be tempted to be distracted while writing. Mine had broken last week and wouldn't even turn on. We had no guns because, well, honestly, she didn't trust herself alone with them. so she grabbed the largest knife we owned. Knife in hand, Gina headed towards the window and looked out at the yard when there was a bang at the door. We didn't answer, didn't move, didn't breathe. I didn't think that we even blinked really. Suddenly, a gruff accent came through the door. "It's all right, love. I'm here to see Anna." I looked through the people and saw a huge bloodshot blue eye staring back at me. I immediately jumped back. "Anna," he called in a sinister sing-song voice. Gina managed to pull herself together and pulled me aside to look herself. The man was further back this time, eyeing the structure of the door and surrounding windows. He was wearing a Santa suit and holding something behind his back. First off, it was in the middle of April. Also, my girlfriend's name was Gina and mine is Savannah. Finally, she managed to somehow find her voice through her fear. You've got the wrong house," she said feebly through the door. No answer. She took a peek out the hole and there was no one there. Nothing but our porch, messy in exactly the way we had left it. I let a breath out in a sigh of relief and ran my hands through her hair, pausing at the top of her head. Then the room filled with a terrible sound of twisting metal and tested glass. He was trying to pull out our air conditioning unit from the window. I looked at the knife and then back at the AC unit. Any second the glass would break and it would be ripped free. If there was any part of him accessible inside the house like his hand, hell, even a finger, she could have used her knife, but there wasn't. Not knowing what else to do and quickly running out of time, we decided to run. I didn't like how our chances looked if we were to stay and wait for him to enter the house. Even with attacking him 2-on-1, we had no idea what he was holding behind his back. Our feet couldn't move fast enough towards the back of the house. Her slender frame struggled to move the freezer while I tried to help her. She had insisted on placing it in front of the back door. Why she thought it was the best place to put it, I'll never know. She never thought we'd have a probable murderer at the door with a machete or something either. The back door faced out directly to the woods that led out to a set of railroad tracks. I knew that we could run along them until we got to a busy intersection a half a mile down. I could try to get help, call the police. Just as she told me, she heard glass breaking from the living room. The freezer moved out of the way. This also effectively blocked the path we had taken to the back door. The wind made a terrible howling sound through the broken window. I wrenched open the back door, stiffened from the years of inactivity. We jumped off the porch, making sure that she jumped first. We hit the ground running. My breath and heartbeat were deafeningly loud in my ears. This is turning out worse than anything Gina had ever thought to write. This certainly wasn't the thrill that she felt from hearing or watching other people's horrors. She always said it was a morbid, sick part of her that would be excited that something actually terrifying was happening to her. Finally, something true for her to write about. She didn't look like she felt that way at all. My sweet girl was trying to move as fast as she could while making as little noise as possible. Looking back towards the house, we didn't see any movement inside. My heart beat faster and a chill ran down the center of my spine. She made good distance until, true to her horror stories, she tripped on a tree stump and went flying to the ground. I saw her scramble to a crouch. I started to hear movement to the side of me. She didn't even have time to look around or scream. The man was only a few feet away from her. We had been tricked by him breaking the window and then coming around the back to wait for us to come out, just like smoking out a foxhole. Gina's mind refused to give up just yet. I saw her manage to get to her feet and get one step in before his hand clasped around her wrist. She yelped helplessly, wincing from pain and I think somewhat out of shock. "I've read all your stories, love," he said, leering at her. His teeth were shiny and brown, like they were smeared with chocolate-covered cherries. "And I've gotta say, this one's my favorite." High above her head, I saw that he held a large metal axe. Its blade looked sharp enough to cut split ends. "No, wait!" she pleaded with him. "You must have read it wrong! In my story, the girl got away and survived. She made it to the railroad tracks." By now, she was starting to cry despite herself. "She made it to the railroad tracks!" she shouted through sobs. His smile got unnaturally wide on his face, the axe raised even higher, ready to make its fatal descent. "Oh no, love, don't you remember? he said with a laugh as the axe fell. That story was rejected. The space between us grew impossibly wide during our escape because of her fall. I was already en route to running back to her when all this was happening. I screamed and shouted at him. In my frenzy, I think I even told him to take me instead. Love makes you do things like that sometimes. That's one of the ways you know it's real. I was too late. She's gone. And I will never forgive myself. Sometimes, I wish he would have killed me too.